let's turn in our Bibles to Matthew chapter 17 as we continue following the life of Jesus. Now, chapter 17 is a continuation from the end of chapter 16. As you recall, last week, Jesus had told the disciples that there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So, chapter 17 continues off of that, and after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart. So, this seemed to be a special honor for these certain disciples, and these were the same disciples that were picked when Jesus healed Jairus' daughter in Luke 8:51. He chose them to go in while he healed the daughter. And also when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he chose Peter, James, and John with him apart while he went and prayed. So these certain disciples had the special honor of experiencing these events with Jesus. And these were also the ones that were standing with him when he said, "Who would not see death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom," which he said in the last chapter. And Mount Tabor in Lower Galilee is the traditional site of Jesus' transfiguration. But it's not a high mountain. It's about 1850 feet high and was probably fortified and inaccessible in Jesus' day. And the more likely site is Mount Hermon, which is 9,100 feet tall, and it is north of Caesarea Philippi, where Peter confessed that Jesus was the Messiah. And people get hung up in which mountain was which. I think it's not really that important. What's important is the transfiguration happened. But those are the two sites that people claim. And Jesus was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And you can also find the transfiguration in Mark chapter 9 and Luke chapter 9. They also record this. And the description here of Jesus's, raiment and his figure, it parallels the description of the Ancient of Days in Daniel chapter 7 verses 9 through 10, and shows that Jesus possessed the glory of his Father. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Luke's recount of this tells us that they were talking about his death and resurrection. Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about that. And we see here three. There's Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. And Moses is a representation of the law. When you think of Moses, you think about the giving of the law. And Moses is just the main person you think about as the law. And when you think of Elijah, he represents the prophets. He was one of the major prophets who did a lot of miracles. So here you have the law and the prophets and God's Son all together. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. And Mark's gospel tells us that Peter didn't actually know what to say. And if you don't know what to say, it's usually best just to stay silent. And Peter said, If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, hear ye him. And this is the second time God confirms Jesus as his Son. The first was at his baptism in chapter 3, verse 17. And God spoke from heaven only twice in Matthew, and both times were to express his love for Jesus and his delight in his works. And the Father's voice from heaven showed Jesus' superiority to Moses and Elijah. In the past, God spoke through Moses and the prophets, and now finally through his Son, and Jesus is the final revelation of God to man. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. And Jesus came and touched them and said, "Arise and be not afraid." And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save Jesus only. And as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, "Tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen from the dead." And we know that Peter wrote of this after Jesus' death and resurrection in his letter. And in chapter 1, verse 18, he said, "In this voice which came from heaven we heard when we were with him in the holy mount." So Peter does confirm the transfiguration and what he experienced after Jesus died. He went and told what happened. And this is Jesus' third mention of his resurrection in Matthew's Gospel. And his disciples asked him, saying, "Why then say the scribes that Elijah must first come?" So, they're referring to Malachi chapter 4, verse 5, which says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." So the disciples asked this to Jesus because they saw his glory before Elijah came. So they were curious about how this prophecy was supposed to come true if they already saw him before Elijah came. And we've covered this topic before about, Elijah and John the Baptist, because we're going to see in a few verses later that he refers to John the Baptist as a type of Elijah. And as we've said before, John the Baptist was not Elijah, but he was a type of Elijah. And in Luke 1:17 it says, "He shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just." And Elijah will come because Jesus says Elijah truly first shall come. And he might be one of the witnesses in Revelation, because there's going to be two witnesses, and Elijah, as you recall, never actually died. He was taken up into heaven in a whirlwind. And some view John the Baptist as the fulfillment of Malachi 4:5. So as we've said before, there's two interpretations. This could either have been Elijah, John the Baptist, and it was fulfilled as a type, or Elijah is still going to come back. And a little fun fact, during the Feast of Passover, there was an empty seat for Elijah in case he came. The Pharisees and all would, leave an empty seat in case Elijah decided to show up. And Jesus answered and said unto them, "Elijah truly shall first come and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elijah is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer them." So, Jesus is saying, Elijah will first come. But he's saying, in the type, that John the Baptist is Elijah, and he's come already. It's because in verse 13 it says, "Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. And when they were come to the multitude, there came to him a certain man kneeling down at him." So we see the disciples had just experienced something wonderful, and they wanted to stay there. They were in a spiritual high, so to speak. And right when they come down from the mountain, they start to see the powers of darkness. Here comes a man with a son who's possessed. So I kind of thought of this as like an interpretation of, we sometimes get into spiritual highs and we want to stay there, but Satan will always be waiting to bring us down when we're at our spiritual high. So like when when things are going good and great and we're feeling good, Satan's always going to be there waiting for you to try to bring you down. And he's always going to be there to try to show you the negative side of things. So we need to be wary of that when we're feeling good, just knowing that we need to be wary of the enemy. And the man said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and sore vexed, for oft times he falleth into the fire, and oft into the water. And this story is also recorded in Mark chapter 9, verses 17 through 29. And I brought him to thy disciples, and they could not cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. And I apologize for the background noise. It seems every time I record a video that there's always some kind of distraction or noise. I'm not in a very good spot to record, so I apologize for all the background noise. I hope it's not too bothersome. And Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. So, as we see here, God sets the limits on Satan, and all spirits are subject unto Jesus. And we also need to remember that Jesus gave us power over these spirits by his name. In those days, they did exorcisms, and they are still actually performed to this day. Verse 19, Then came the disciples to Jesus apart, and said, Why could not we cast him out? And Jesus said unto them, Because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible for you. And Mark's gospel tells us that the man was foaming, gnashing, and being torn by the demon. And that is found in Mark 9:18. And the disciples probably saw the evil spirit's power on full display, and it caused doubt and unbelief, so they could not cast out the demon. So, the man probably brought the child to the disciples, and while he was bringing them to them, they probably saw the child or the man foaming. It was probably a very scary sight to see this guy foaming, gnashing, and being torn by a demon. And it probably shook the disciples to see this evil spirit's power on full display. And so after they witnessed that, they probably had doubts, are we actually going to be able to get this demon out? And so that's probably why they were not able to do it, because Jesus said it was because of your unbelief that they could not get the demon out. And when Jesus refers to removing a mountain, it was a metaphor for accomplishing an impossible task. And nothing that Jesus authorizes his followers to do will be impossible. Then Jesus said, Howbeit this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. So, was Jesus talking about faith or the demon? When he says this kind goeth not out, to be able to move mountains or to get that certain type of demon out. So I'll let you decide that. And if you take on the stance he's referring to the spirit, and elsewhere in the Bible too, there seems to be different rankings of evil spirits. Like in this case, this one was more intense or more powerful to be having to be taken out compared to other demons. As Paul said, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. And so it could indicate there's different types of demons and ranks. In And while they abode in Galilee, Jesus said unto them, The Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and the third day he shall be raised again. And they were exceeding sorry. So here Jesus again tells his disciples what will happen, but they still don't fully understand yet. And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, Doth not your master pay tribute? Now the tribute was collected from every Jewish male over the age of 20, and it was used for the upkeep of the Jerusalem temple. He saith, Yes. And when he was come to the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, What thinkest thou, Simon, of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children, or of strangers? Peter saith unto him, Of strangers. Jesus saith unto him, Then are the children free. So the taxes were for Jesus' house. They were for his father's house. And Jesus was the child. So he shouldn't have to pay the tax. When he asked him, the kings of the earth take custom or tribute, they don't take them of their own children. When they conquer somebody else, they make them pay tribute. And because Jesus' disciples were children of the true king, they were free from the obligation to support the temple. Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, and cast an hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take, and give unto them for me and thee. And this is similar to Paul's stance on not offending his brethren. As you recall in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 13, Paul said that he wouldn't eat no meat as long as the world stood if it caused his brother to offend. And we also need to be careful about offending our fellow believers if we feel that something we do is okay, but they see it as wrong. So if we can be sure of something that's not wrong, if it is not conflicting to Scripture, the Bible, or anything like that, and we know that we can do it, but somebody else sees it as a sin or wrong, if we have to be around that person, we should try not to offend them in that way of what we do. Paul saw nothing wrong with eating meat, but he wouldn't do it because he knew it would offend his brethren. So that's just something we need to think about when we know that we have our liberty and freedom in Jesus, but we also need to be considerate about what offends other people biblically. And that will conclude our study for chapter 17. Next week we will pick up with chapter 18. And again, I apologize for all the background noise. It has really been rough. I've heard trains, planes, and motorcycles, pretty much everything you could possibly think of tonight. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all next week. Thank you for watching.